Hello, my name is Al Parks, and I am a certified lifestyle educator and also a personal fitness chef. Today, I will be talking to you about hypertension, but also I would like to let you know that I am a member or a part of an organization with my wife called Be in Good Health. Our primary goal is to help people to not only reverse diseases such as diabetes, but because she is also a psychologist, we help people deal with the mind as well. But my focus at this particular time is hypertension. So we want to look at hypertension and see how we can release the pressure. Hypertension. What is high blood pressure? When you hear the word hypertension and high blood pressure, we're really talking about the same thing. High blood pressure is more of a layman's term. Hypertension will tend to be a word that you will hear doctors use. But when you hear these two words, know that they're talking about the same thing. Now, to simply put it, hypertension is the blood pressure measurement of the force applied to the artery walls. When the blood is pumped from the heart, many of us don't realize, but the heart, when it pumps, that's an extreme amount of force or pressure that is applied to the blood vessels. But the way that our blood vessels are, they're very flexible, so that when the blood is pumped, they can expand when they need to, but they can also contract. They contract and expand, contract and expand. That's really how our blood pressure is measured. So what we see, our blood pressure can be one of two things. It can be high, which we would have hypertension. But our blood pressure can also be low, which we would have hypotension. So remember those two terms. Though we're talking about hypertension, hypotension can be just as dangerous in a lot of cases. What is normal blood pressure? A reading of 120 over 80 is considered normal or optimal blood pressure. Anytime your numbers start to go a little bit above this, that can generate concern. But I want to share something with you about normal blood pressure. Normal blood pressure, as it reads, when your blood pressure is at a normal level, the 120 over 80, anytime it starts to creep up anywhere above that amount, just the slightest bit, that's when you start to run into some problems with what they will call pre-hypertension. But let me give you the other numbers, and then we'll come back to my book here, because I think there's some more just as important points that need to be shared before we talk to you about that. What is hypertension? Hypertension, once again, is defined as a systolic blood pressure top reading. That's the top number when your doctor tells you you have a reading of, say, 120 over 80. That 120 is going to be the systolic number or the top number. And as it reads, when that number is consistently over 130, then your number is considered high. Now, to read the full sentence, it says a systolic blood pressure reading, top number, consistently over 130, and or a diastolic lower number reading over 85 or above. Now we're looking at hypertension. Any number in between 120 and that 130, that's pre-hypertension, which can also be just as bad. We noted earlier that disease never comes without a cause. So what we're going to look at now is some of the causes of hypertension. Heredity. It is true that, as we can read, men whose parents have hypertension are 4 times more likely, that's 4 times more likely to develop hypertension themselves by the age of 40. But I want to share something with you. Now our children, teenagers, even some adolescents, are being diagnosed with hypertension. Now, if you think back, those of you who are adults, That was never once the case. That was never the case. You can think back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, even 40 years, or back further, however far you want to go back. Kids were not being diagnosed with hypertension. But now, our kids, even in high school, elementary school, are being diagnosed. And some reports are that many doctors, when kids go in for annual physicals or go in to get checkups, they're missing this diagnosis, and they're experiencing problems as a result. So you want to pay close attention to that with your kids. Now, an even more startling statistic, it says men with both parents who had early onset high blood pressure were 20 times more likely to develop it themselves by the time they turned 35. And when it says early onset high blood pressure, just meaning that they found out when they were much younger, say in their 20s or even 30s. The chances increased 20 times of offspring to develop hypertension. Now, we have a saying, once again, though we're looking at heredity here, it still does not have to be. Just because my mom, my dad, my brothers had hypertension, I do not have to have hypertension. Our saying is, heredity loads the gun. Lifestyle pulls the trigger. If the trigger is never pulled, the gun is, I wouldn't say it's useless, but the gun will not harm anyone. So if heredity being the loaded gun, if the trigger of heredity is never pulled, and we're going to find out later on how it is pulled, then we will never have a problem in terms of hypertension, that is. As we mentioned, disease never comes without a cause. What are some of the causes of hypertension? Well, for one, a high salt intake. Reading from the book, one of my manuals actually that we teach from, called Health Power, found on page 4041. And we're talking about salt. Now, I must say, we do need salt. We have been told sometimes when people are diagnosed as hypertensive to take out salt or severely cut it back. But your body needs salt. Contained in that salt is iodine, which is a key mineral that the body needs. But let me read to you about salt. It says, why do Americans eat so much salt? In today's life, it is hard to get away from salt. About 75% of our salt intake comes from fast food and processed food. When we say processed food, what do we mean? Anything out of its natural state. Most of the time, not all of your canned items, but if you turn the back of that item over, you will see that the sodium intake is going to be very high. Salt is a great preservative, and so they have to add sodium/salt to these items to help preserve them, thus increasing their shelf life. It also goes on to say, a taste for salt is easy to develop, and salty snacks and foods abound to accommodate us. So we're eating more so for taste, but we're suffering as a result because of the high salt content in some of our foods. Secondly, some of the causes of hypertension. Low potassium. Potassium is found in many of our foods. We have the banana here because that's the most common food that potassium is found in, or that we know of. There's some other foods, though, that are much higher in potassium than the banana itself. But it's just one of the more common ones that most of us are familiar with. Obesity. That's a mounting and major problem in our society today. Now, we want to look in terms of obesity. It says, nearly everyone who is significantly overweight will eventually experience high blood pressure. It is just a matter of time. They're not sure necessarily how obesity contributes to it,